Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Erin Maye Quade. I use she, her pronouns. I am the recently returned advocacy director at Gender Justice. I was on parental leave, and today is my first day back. Joining me this evening for our SCOTUS chat is Jess Braverman, the legal director at Gender Justice, and Teresa Nelson from ACLU, our partner in this broadcast. And I'm going to let Jess and Teresa introduce themselves and just say hi. Jess, go first.
Well, welcome back, Erin. We're so glad to have you. We missed you on your maternity leave. And now I get to see your baby in all the Zooms, which is really exciting. I'm Jess Braverman, and I'm the legal director at Gender Justice. And I'll pass it on to our dear friend and partner, Terry Nelson.
Hi, everyone. Teresa Nelson, Terry Nelson from the ACLU of Minnesota. It's really great to be here and great to see both you, Erin, and Jess.
Thanks for being here. And I was like, should I say Terry? Should I say Teresa? But we can go with both. So obviously we are here to digest the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs v. Jackson, Women's Health, the overturned Roe v. Wade, and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. I just want to recognize this moment is incredibly heavy. It's incredibly traumatizing. It's incredibly despair-filled, and I totally understand that. I want folks to know that after we're done digesting what this decision means, we are going to talk about what's next and what folks can do to plug in. So please, know that you don't have to despair. Folks like ACLU and Gender Justice, we've been preparing for this moment for years. We've known that it's coming. So if you're joining tonight and you're like, I'm surprised, that's okay. We were not surprised. We are ready and prepared to help you plug in so that we can have a better, brighter future. I want to start by just saying that as of Friday, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, 8 states immediately banned abortion. Those states are our neighbors: South Dakota, Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Alabama, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Ohio. So, very real talk. There were people who were in abortion clinics, sitting in chairs, waiting to have abortions on Friday morning that did not get to access those abortions, right? Like there are real people in this country right now that did not get to access care that thought they were going to be able to access care. I will say Utah and Louisiana also had immediate trigger bans that were blocked by their state courts, which is some good news. It's a little bit of bright hope there. There's also some states that in the next 30 days will be banning abortion. So our other neighbor, North Dakota, then Wyoming, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Idaho. And then there's states that are considered likely to ban. So Iowa, our neighbor to the south, Indiana, Georgia, South Carolina, West Virginia. That's a lot of states. That's a lot of pregnant people who will need access to care. And it's a very dire situation. And so I'm going to let us walk through the legal stuff, because when stuff happens in the courts, sometimes it has such an immediate impact. And if it's not joyous, and it's so, hard to wrap your head around, you want to know, how did we end up here? So first, I'm going to turn to you, Jess, and just say, look, what is the Dobbs opinion? What does it say? What does it do?
The Dobbs opinion is, it was hard to be like, as the legal person, like give your analysis, because there's not really an analysis to give, if I'm being honest. Like it was kind of like, you had abortion rights under the Constitution, but JK, LOL, like, no, you don't. There wasn't much real reasoning in it. They just kind of made stuff up. Like they went through what some people thought throughout history about abortion, decided to kind of disregard anything that suggested that, a lot of people thought abortion was okay under a variety of circumstances. They looked only at, evidence that suggested some people thought abortion was not okay in history. And then they decided that based on this like historical analysis that was like very cherry picked, that the original framers of the Constitution never intended to protect abortion in our Constitution, and therefore Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided. So basically what they said, the upshot of all of this, is based on some like ridiculous reasoning about what certain people thought of abortion hundreds of years ago. They decided to no longer protect, that the Constitution no longer protects abortion care. What that means, like, what does that mean? So most rights, when something's protected by the Constitution, let's say like how gun rights are treated, right? If there's a law that infringes on your right to have a gun, the courts will look at that law very closely. It's called strict scrutiny. They'll really analyze it to be like, why did they enact this? Does it really do the thing they claim? Is it really just up there as a barrier to make it harder for people to access firearms? Is it really necessary? Is it really going to achieve like an important government goal? And is there like a narrower way that they could have achieved that goal without like being so restrictive, right? It's a really detailed analysis. For everything else that's not protected at that level, it's like more or less. I mean, there's some stuff in the middle, and then it's rational basis review. So that would be like, let's say you owned a bar and you wanted to dye your beer green on St. Patrick's Day, and your city had a law that said like you can't dye your beer green, right? The courts would look and be like, does the government have some reason to not want you to dye your beer green? Great, done. It's an extremely deferential standard. So if there's a law banning abortion that comes out now at the federal level, that's challenged at the federal level, what the federal courts will basically do is be like, well, did the government have some like legitimate reason for doing this? Okay, that's great. Moving on. It's really bad. It means that like total bans could stand up to this. Weird restrictions could stand up to this. We have yet to be seen what will happen when issues are litigated. So let's say a state has a total ban, no exception. The court's going to have to look at that, and we'll see what they do. But abortion's just not considered protected the way we take like really serious rights, right? Like the right, like the way the court treats the right to bear arms, for example.
Yeah. So just repeating back what you said, like before this decision came out, our right to access abortion care was constitutional right. And when they looked at laws that infringed on that constitutional right, they really scrutinized it. And they said, is it narrowly tailored for a compelling state interest? Or no, that was undue burden, I guess. Yeah.
So
but it was a higher standard.
Abortion. So like, I'm giving examples of like levels of scrutiny that the government can give to laws. And now abortion's at the lowest level. Before this, it was at this other level called undue burden. But, it's not super important to go to all the details about how courts analyze these laws. Basically, what this means is that courts are going to be extremely deferential when states pass all sorts of abortion bans. The courts aren't going to look at them very closely. And we have yet to see what courts will do with things like, full bans with no exceptions for even ectopic pregnancy, let's say. Like we've yet to see what a court would do with that. But I don't want to like, before we get to the next part, I don't want people to despair. Like there's more to say about this. This is just like, what did the Dobbs majority rule? There's more to it. And like Erin was saying, some states that are going to ban abortion, just because abortion isn't protected by the federal constitution right now, doesn't mean that abortion's like automatically illegal, right? Like there are states where abortion's protected. There are states where there's not bans on abortion, right? What it does is like a state can try to ban abortion, and the courts would decide what to do with such a ban as it's written by the states. But right now, for example, to be clear, for anyone who drops off after like 2 minutes of listening to lawyers talk, abortion is legal in Minnesota. Like if you log off now, like the thing I want to make sure you know before you do is that abortion is legal in Minnesota, and we're going to talk more about that.
Yes, thank you for that. So I want to turn it over to you, Terry, because the dissent was really, really powerful. It was co-authored by all three of the dissenting justices, one dissent, one voice, although I think if you read it, you can tell who's writing what parts, but it was really powerful. I want you to talk a little bit about the dissent.
Yeah, the dissent was definitely scathing. It feels a little bit validating or cathartic to read after reading the majority opinion, which is awful. It was authored by Justices Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. So they really call out the majority, first for their raw exercise of power, for their spurious reasoning throughout. And they also take the court to task for upending the balance that was struck when Roe v. Wade was decided. It was decided at a time when there was not general public agreement about abortion. And so the court struck a balance to recognize and protect the privacy interests of the pregnant person, to bodily autonomy, and also to protect the state's interest in the fetus. And they came up with this framework. My apologies, somebody's at our front door. They came up with this framework that really protects balances all of those competing interests. The decision also details the actual harm that's already been wrought because of this decision. The dissent points out that there's the method that the court has used to decide what liberty means in our Constitution in the 14th Amendment. What does liberty mean? What does that right really mean? And the method the court has used has been resulted in expanding the score of the sphere of liberty rather than contracting, and that liberty should not be viewed as frozen in time and historically what liberty was when the Constitution was drafted. The justices also warn that associated rights like the freedom to marry, protected by Obergefell and others, are also at risk despite the majority's claim that they won't be affected. They evoke the imagery of a Jenga tower losing, a very low foundation. And ultimately, the court says, with sorrow for the court, but more for the many millions of American women who have today lost a fundamental constitutional protection, we dissent. And I will leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think what always strikes me when I read about justices looking so far back into history, I think at one point in the dissent, they say, they looked at the 13th century, they put 13th in parentheses with like an exclamation point. America wasn't even a country. Looking to, do we find that the Constitution wanted women to have power, wanted women to sit on this? Like, we know that they didn't. And so it seems a little bit outcome determinative, right? To say, at this point in time, we're going to look back and say, okay, what did the founders and the writers of the Constitution think of women and people with uteruses? What did they think of people of color? Let's base our decisions on that. But then when it's something like guns, it's like, well, we can't look too far back in history. It really is like whatever outcome they want to get to. That seems to be the guiding principles that they hold to, not any sort of real methodology, which is so frustrating. As a person who's living under this chaos that they're enacting on America. So Jess, what does this mean, this decision? What does it mean for people in Minnesota who need abortion care?
Yeah, so like I said, abortion is still legal in Minnesota. The issue is rights are not the same thing as access. So you can have a right, but you may not be able to access that right. And then what good does it do you to have the right? Right. I mean, there's the indignity of not having it to begin with, of course, but like, if you want an abortion, you should be able to get that abortion. Because so many states around us are banning abortion, there's going to be an increase in demand here in Minnesota, and there's already issues with waiting times at clinics. People who would go for care in the Twin Cities are heading to Duluth. We're really glad that there's a clinic coming in. We're sorry they have to do this, but we have a clinic coming into Moorhead from Fargo. And we welcome them. I wish they didn't have to do this, but they would be our only clinic over on the west side of the state. So there's going to be a problem where we really need to increase access and take away the barriers that we have under Minnesota law right now that make access completely unnecessarily difficult and more costly and things like that. So for now, we're going to go into all that a little bit more, but just to say, like, abortion is legal in Minnesota, and Terry's going to explain how it's protected in Minnesota.
Yes, and I'll just say, these laws, we have a 24-hour waiting period. We don't let advanced practice clinicians, nurse midwives, nurse practitioners provide abortion care, even though it's well within their scope of practice. We have mandated cremation burial. We have a medically irrelevant and unnecessary script that doctors are required to read to patients. We have a waiting period for minors, and minors are required to notify parents before they access abortion care, regardless of their relationship with their parents. So on a national scale, so that's what it means for us in Minnesota. We have it's legal, but we have barriers, and we're working on that. What does this decision mean on a national scale? I talked about the states that have banned abortion or could ban abortion, but like, what does that mean? What happens? I think that's for you.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, actually, first I was going to talk about Doe v. Gomez.
My apologies.
That's okay. That's all right. So a lot of people don't realize that the U.S. Constitution is the floor. It's not the ceiling. The U.S. Constitution has basically the minimum rights that states must respect. And so the states are free to have greater protections. And in Minnesota, we have in a number of ways. The Minnesota Constitution provides greater protection for the right to privacy. And specifically, in a case called Doe versus Gomez in 1996, the Minnesota Supreme Court held that the right to choose, the right to have an abortion in Minnesota is stronger than under the U.S. Constitution. That case dealt with a ban on public funding for abortions. And under the U.S. Supreme Court precedent, states could refuse to fund abortions for people who were on medical assistance and Medicare. The Minnesota Supreme Court said no. In Minnesota, our rights are protected greater than under the U.S. Constitution, and so we have public funding for abortions for people with limited means. Now, the decision gives great comfort to me, but there are also some limitations in that decision. First of all, it was decided in 1996, and at the time, the court really drew a distinctive line between what they called therapeutic abortions and elective abortions. There's no such thing. There's no such line. Abortion is healthcare, full stop. If you're pregnant, you either need medical care to carry that pregnancy to term, or you need an abortion. Either one is healthcare. And so that distinction is really false. But it causes problems. It causes problems, particularly in the context of incarcerated people who are seeking care. Minnesota's DOC has a policy that says if you want an abortion, if it's therapeutic, we will pay for it and make sure that you get it. If it is elective, if you're simply choosing to have an abortion for no good reason, we are going to make you pay for the guards to transport you. We're going to make you pay for the transport van. We're going to make you pay for the procedure all up front. And so that's a significant barrier for people. And so even though we do have this right, like Jess said before about access, access isn't always there. The other thing is that this is a court decision. Our Minnesota Constitution could be amended to overturn that decision. And our Minnesota Supreme Court justices are all elected. And so it's not set in stone.
Yeah, so there was a question in the chat. Could the Doe v. Gomez decision be overturned by the Minnesota Supreme Court? And the answer could be, but do you want to talk a little bit about, the likelihood of that, or what?
Yeah. Well, and I wore my vote t-shirt because I think, there are so many things that we need to do, but voting is really important as well. The Minnesota Supreme Court justices are all elected. Right now, I would say there is a progressive majority on the court, and the decision is not vulnerable, I don't think, to being overturned. However, justices are up for re-election every 2 years. And so right now, in the current cycle, there are the ones who are up for re-election are running unopposed. That could change. And then again, also a constitutional amendment just requires a simple majority in the House and in the Senate to put it on the ballot, and then a simple majority of those voting on the amendment to pass. So again, voting is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and I'll say too, the governor of the state appoints the Supreme Court justices, who then have to run for election at the after 2 years. So that's why voting is so important, is because it affects it in multiple ways. And I'll also just say too, if folks have questions, please enter them into the comments for whatever platform you're watching this on, and that'll get over to us. Terry, was there anything else you wanted to say about Doe v. Gomez? No. Okay.
Nope, that's it.
Awesome. So in Minnesota, abortion is legal. Our Supreme Court has said we don't preference one pregnancy outcome over the other. We don't put our thumb on the scale and force people to have children they don't want to have, or we don't force people to not have children they want to have. We don't have a preference. But what does this decision mean for the rest of the country, Jess?
Yeah, so it's pretty terrible, because it leaves people's healthcare and you know, I mean, there's a lot more, right? Like, think about how many things a pregnancy in your life, a pregnancy will impact, right? It leaves all of that up to politicians, who have shown us, like, in these past couple years more than ever, but, like, you know, have shown us that they're kind of willing to do whatever to appeal to, like, to a certain base, right? And so, you know, if people, if the loud minority are calling to ban all abortions, even if doing so will, you know, lead to the death of the pregnant person, you're going to have elected officials, politicians, running on that, pushing that, and maybe even getting that passed, right? The thing about the Constitution, is that there are certain things that, like, your peers don't get to vote on, right? And politicians don't get to decide for you. Like, no one gets to vote on whether a pregnant person is going to live or die. That's just not right. Like, there's some things that are so crucial to, you know, your liberty and your life that people just don't get to vote on it. And I think for me, that's really what was intended by the Constitution. Like, you don't just leave stuff up to politicians. And abortion, you know, pregnancy outcomes, all of that is it should, it's, there's no question that should be on that list, right? It's not up to my neighbor. We don't convene panels of people to get together and decide, like, okay, this person has an ectopic pregnancy, what should we do, right? It's, you know, let the person, let their family, let their physician decide. I mean, ectopic pregnancy is a bad example because there's not much you could do at that point, but just in terms of, like, any other, like, even if you just want an abortion, why do people get to go vote on politicians who then decide if you can access that? The Constitution is supposed to prevent that kind of government overreach and that kind of, like, you know, letting your neighbors get involved in your life that much. It's just, you know, through the process of politics.
And for me, like, it really brings up for me, you know, when we had slavery in the United States, right? That was when the government didn't recognize marriages of enslaved people. It forced people to have children and then stole those children and sold them on auction blocks, right? Like, that is what it is returning to for me, is that kind of overreach where it says, no, the government absolutely has control over your lives in this way. This is a place, you know, making your family, having your family, loving who you love. That is no longer a decision that belongs to you. It belongs to the government now. And it reeks of that. And I think the majority opinion that called to slavery was so offensive because what they're doing is actually they're, like, taking the tenets of that and then trying to, like, cobble together a justification as if they're, you know, doing the opposite. Do you want to talk about the criminalization of pregnancy outcomes? I mean, I was just pregnant like 2 months ago, right? And I had friends who wanted to take me on, like, one last trip to Austin, Texas. And I was like, absolutely not, because if I have a miscarriage, how are you all going to prove that you didn't bring me to Texas to try to have an abortion? You can't prove that. And none of y'all want to go to jail for me having a miscarriage. So talk a little bit about the criminalization of pregnancy outcomes and who it impacts and kind of what we're seeing.
So we've been seeing criminalization of pregnancy outcomes for a long time, actually. Almost half of the states have fetal homicide laws, and many of them apply at the earliest stages of pregnancy. Now, in Minnesota, the pregnant person is typically exempted from that fetal homicide law, but not in every state. And this is something that's been happening for years. The American Bar Association estimated that since Roe was decided, which legalized abortion, there have been more than 1,200 people arrested across the United States based on their pregnancy outcomes. And that includes miscarriages, stillbirths, self-managed abortions, or neonatal losses. And that's since the court has recognized a right to abortion. So, you know, somebody who has a miscarriage that the medical professionals attribute to illegal drug use is subject to prosecution. People who ended their pregnancy on their own or helped a loved one end their pregnancy have been subjected to prosecutions. I could go on, but the bottom line is that as these bans go into effect, we're going to start seeing more and more people subjected to criminal prosecution for their adverse pregnancy outcomes. For example, we saw in Texas, a Texas woman, Lizelle Herrera, was arrested and charged with murder after she had a miscarriage, even though that statute that she was charged under specifically exempted the pregnant person from facing criminal charges. Those charges were ultimately dropped after a massive public uproar, but not everybody has the access to information sharing to generate that public uproar. The reality is that these kinds of laws, like every other criminal law, is going to have and has had a significant disparity based on race. And people of color are going to feel the effects of this more harshly than white women, white people. And the racial disparities that are baked into our criminal system are going to be at work here as well. People who don't have access to funds, people who don't have, can't travel, are also going to be more affected. And we're just going to see more and more of this. But it's a phenomenon that we have been seeing ever since Roe was decided. And so it's just going to be worse now.
Yeah. And right, like there's one woman in Texas, but when it's like thousands of women across the country, we won't all be able to target our energy to that one person, that one case. Yeah.
Yep.
There was a question from the chat. Is it possible that future lawsuits against total bans or wildly restrictive state laws could be ruled illegal by the Supreme Court? You're on. Yep. Go ahead, Jess.
I would say it's possible. I mean, like I said, there is a basis of review for laws that, the right is not explicitly protected by the Constitution. The courts haven't recognized that it's a right that's explicitly protected by the Constitution. But, there still needs to be what's called rational basis review. Is there really like a rational basis for the legislature to pass this law? So I do think that there is, and then there's other theories that people could try, and but if the question is like, would the Supreme Court allow a total ban? This Supreme Court in its current makeup, yeah. I mean, I don't know what they will do, and I'm not saying it's not, it's worth trying everything. But I think what we've learned, if we haven't learned this before, what we've learned from this at the very least is that the law is what judges say it is. Like, there's not a like, what is the Constitution? What is the law? It's not something like handed down from on high and there's no like room for interpretation, right? Like, the law is ultimately what judges say it is, and the Supreme Court, there's no review of the Supreme Court, right? Like, that's where things end. So the law ends up being what the Supreme Court says it is. So they will be able to uphold a total ban if they want to, and they can strike down a total ban if they want to, and we'll have to see what they do.
And I just want to say too that one of the things that was said in the majority opinion is, we send this back to Congress and the states. And so even though they keep saying like, oh, it's to the states to decide, they did leave the door open for Congress to pass a total ban, a nationwide total ban. And I think that's certainly something that we should be thinking about when we're voting in November too. So terrifying news all around. Let's talk about what we're doing here in Minnesota, right? I said at the very beginning, we are prepared. We were prepared for this moment. It's still a gut punch, but we were prepared for this moment. We're prepared to plug you in. Jess, you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing to expand access in Minnesota?
Yeah, so in Minnesota, there's a lot we're doing, but from the lawyers, so we have a lawsuit, Doe v. Minnesota, where we're challenging a number of abortion restrictions that are on the books here in Minnesota. So we are challenging, for example, the physician-only law that says that only physicians can provide abortion care, even though advanced practitioners and others can safely provide medication and aspiration abortion care and do so in other states. And so, it's kind of, I would say it's like embarrassing that in the state with like the Mayo Clinic and Medtronic and like all these medical innovators, we have like a law from 1970 that regulates pregnancy. Like these laws are, they're harmful, they're shameful, they're embarrassing. We have a law that requires minors to notify both parents of their abortion. So they have to do it's like written notification 48 hours in advance of any abortion. And it's like to both parents, even if one parent, like they've never met them in their lives. The alternative is they can go into court and beg a judge for an abortion. And the judge signs off on it. And a lot of those kids actually go in with one parent. And the parent's like, yeah, I support my kid. Like, why am I here? And it's, again, it's shameful. We have laws that we have a mandatory 24-hour waiting period where the government has decided you don't know how to make decisions and they need to like help you with that. We have informed consent, like specific rules around what physicians have to say to their patients, like things like, did you know, like, hey, and for everyone watching, did you know that like abortion causes breast cancer? I bet you didn't. Like, that's because it doesn't, right? But they still have to talk about it for some reason. Again, and it's embarrassing in the state that we have these laws. And so then there's also, just the overall scheme. Erin, you talk about this a lot, where it's not that like it's not that abortion's treated like other healthcare. It's like abortion's a felony unless you follow A, B, and C law, right? Otherwise, it's a felony. There's not like a colonoscopy is a felony unless you follow A, B, and C law, right? That's
Right.
particular to abortion. It's treated differently. It's criminalized in the way that no other healthcare is. And we are also challenging those criminal penalties as well. So our lawsuit challenges a number of restrictions in Minnesota. We're really excited to get our outcome in this case. We're expecting a big deal ruling from the court in July, and then we're expecting to go to trial towards the end of summer. And we're really excited. We think this is long overdue to get rid of these really outdated and harmful laws.
Yeah. So, abortion's legal, but we're working to make sure that it is more accessible, and we're expanding the ability for people to access care. Before I go to my next thing, which is me talking about our leadership agenda for abortion access beyond Roe, someone asked why our elected federal officials aren't taking steps to codify abortion as healthcare. And I'm going to speak to that just a little bit. So our federal Congress, Democrats control the House, and then it is a 50-50 split in the Senate, with Kamala Harris making the tie-breaking vote. In order to pass bills in the Senate, you have to have 60 votes in order to get around the filibuster. It's the only body in the entire country where a majority doesn't pass the laws. It's 60 out of 100 has to pass a law. And so because there are not 60 pro-reproductive freedom senators in the Senate, they can't even move a bill to vote on it. And that's why federal officials haven't taken steps to codify abortion as healthcare. They could, with a simple majority, vote to end the filibuster, whether it's for abortion specifically, or, the filibuster used to exist, 60 votes in order to confirm a Supreme Court justice. That is no longer exists. So you can end it for specific things. You could end it altogether. They certainly could do that. There are two senators in particular who are members of the Democratic Party, along with the rest of the Republicans currently, who are against ending the filibuster. That's Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Although, should Mitch McConnell and Republicans win the Senate in November, I don't know how long they might keep the filibuster. I don't know if that's a principle that will hold through. That's just how it is currently. So that's why those steps aren't being taken at the moment. Another question of the chat before I go to my next thing is, can you speculate about potential legal risks providers or health plans providing benefits to those in other states to come to Minnesota might face as a result of this ruling?
So there are a lot of organizations that dedicate their time to helping people access abortion, like there are abortion funds and, other organizations that have been doing this for decades. Our local abortion fund, we'll talk more about them, Our Justice. We also have Hot Dish Militia and others. But Our Justice was around before Roe, and they'll continue to be around after Roe. And, abortion funds providers are getting legal advice on how to help as many people as possible without subjecting themselves or the people they're helping to just undue criminal risk. So there are people providing that legal advice to those who are providing this care, including us and other attorneys. So there are right now, I think what's going to happen is that we're going to be in some uncharted territory with criminal laws being written in ways that we don't see them now. So right now, I was giving this example to someone. Let's say this is not real. This isn't, what? I won't even use you, Erin, because I know you're like, yeah, I won't use you as an example. Let's say Terry, I'll use you. Let's say Terry's like, I want to go buy some pot in Colorado. And I'm like, and she's like, I'm going to take it in Colorado. And then when I'm done and I have none left, I'm going to come back to Minnesota, right? It's legal in Colorado. It's not legal here. And I'm like, Terry, you have fun. And I give her $20. We haven't committed a crime, right? Because it's legal to buy marijuana in Colorado. And so Terry goes to Colorado, buys her marijuana, has her fun time, is done, has no more, comes back to Minnesota. And that's typically how criminal laws are written. If the end result is like a legal thing, you're not helping anyone commit a crime. I'm expecting that we're going to see some states pass laws that make it illegal to help someone get an abortion somewhere else. And that's where we're going to run into difficulties. But again, like I said, people who do provide that direct service of helping people in states where there are bans access care in states where it's legal are getting really specific, thoughtful legal advice as they enter some uncharted territory. And so those folks are going to continue doing their work, and we're going to continue supporting them. I don't know if anyone has something to add to that, but
I think you had a great example, and it is definitely uncharted territory. I think, here in Minnesota, we will want to look at how we can offer the greatest protection for folks here in Minnesota. We are a sanctuary, and that's could be meaningless if we can't protect folks.
Yeah. I'm going to make a last call for questions. Please put them in the comments on whatever platform you're watching on. We'll make sure we get to those. But I want to talk about the Minnesota Beyond Roe leadership agenda for abortion access. This is kind of a blueprint that was put together. It's pieces of legislation. Like I said, we are prepared for this moment, right? And so this leadership agenda for abortion access after Roe has 3 buckets, and I'll tell you what those buckets are. The first is repealing Minnesota's unnecessary restrictions on abortion care, right? So this is the 24-hour waiting period, a provider only law, the 2-parent consent for minors, all of the things that we've talked about, right? It's stopping those things from happening. And we're attacking those through litigation. And there's also pieces of legislation, some that have been drafted, some that will be drafted. The second bucket is protecting patients and providers from post-Roe attacks. So making sure that we have defenses against out-of-state attacks on our rights, and we're protecting patients and providers, and then protecting people who opt to manage their abortions on their own. I think this is going to be really, really important. Telemedicine is real. People can access the abortion medication from home. And so we want to make sure that people are safe from prosecution, whether they're managing a miscarriage or choosing to end their pregnancy. And we know that anti-abortion activists are going to be criminalizing self-managed abortions. And so we want to make sure that that doesn't happen here in Minnesota. And then the third is ensuring equitable and affordable access to abortion care. So guaranteeing public and private insurance coverage of abortion care and backstopping it with financial assistance for those who can't get coverage, making sure Minnesotans know about their insurance and financial assistance options, and then supporting Minnesota's abortion funds and practical support organizations are so, so important. We also want to expand the funding for pregnancy support services so that pregnant people have a range of options. So in Minnesota right now, we fund crisis pregnancy centers, which are anti-abortion centers that seek to coerce and deceive pregnant people away from having abortions through a myriad of ways. They receive about $7 million biannually from the Minnesota state government. So in Minnesota, the State Department of Health gives grants to organizations that are giving medical misinformation to patients in Minnesota. What we would love to see is actually provide that funding to centers that actually give medically relevant and accurate information to pregnant people, that provides real pregnancy support. There is a need for prenatal care, free prenatal care, for services for onesies and diapers and cribs and all of those things. I mean, I'm literally up to my nose in diapers. Like it's expensive, and people do have a real need for that, but we have to fund them through real and legitimate and reputable organizations. And then we have to fix the Medicaid reimbursement rates. We have to ensure abortion access is available for Medicaid recipients by raising the Medicaid reimbursement rate. Right now, Medicaid reimburses abortion providers at a rate that's far below the cost of abortion care. And so it makes it really difficult for clinics to accept Medicaid patients because they're paying out of pocket, right? They actually cost them money to provide them care. So that is our agenda for Beyond Roe, and whatever platform you're on, hopefully someone can pop the link into that for you, but we are prepared and we're working on that. So the ways that you can get involved in that: one, when those pieces of legislation are up, contact your legislators. And I'm going to tell you why. Legislators cannot read your mind. Even if you live in a place where you're like, I saw my legislator at the march, they are down, they know. Actually, They don't know. They need to hear from you. They have just said, this is what I'm for. So please make sure that you are contacting your legislators. The second one is you absolutely have to vote. And we talk about this a lot. I'm sure a lot of people watching this are like, I vote all the time and we still ended up in this place. Like 50% of Americans do not vote. And that's why Terry's wearing the shirt she's wearing. That's why I'm saying it again. And it's not just every 4 years in a presidential election. I literally want you voting for your water and soil conservation district, even if it's the only thing that's on the ballot. Every single piece of government affects this. So I want you to flip your ballots over and vote for judges. I want you to do your research on judges. I want you to vote in primaries. I want you to vote in general elections in odd and off presidential years. You need to vote every single time that there is an election. So I will get off my high horse a little bit here and go over to some other calls to action. Jess, do you want to talk a little bit about what you have?
Yeah. So one way of supporting abortion access in Minnesota is donating. Organizations do need funds to keep doing the work they do. So I'll just name a couple right now. I'll just start with my shirt, Our Justice, our local abortion fund. They, like I said, have been around before Roe v. Wade. They will continue to be around after Roe v. Wade. They provide amazing services. Another excellent organization is Just the Pill. They provide mobile abortion care and telehealth abortion care. They're a nonprofit. They're getting a bunch of bulletproof vans to go near the border where abortion bans are so that people can access their abortion care through their mobile clinics. They're amazing. Hot Dish Militia over in Duluth funds abortion and has like the best name ever. And then there's also us, Gender Justice, our friends at the ACLU, Unrestrict Minnesota. We're all out here making sure that, whatever happens in Minnesota is going to be good. It's going to expand access. You're going to know about it. So Gender Justice, ACLU of Minnesota, Unrestrict, Just the Pill, Hot Dish Militia. There's We Health. There's Whole Women's Health. Look up the providers in your state and donate to those groups. Look up abortion funds and donate to those groups. And I'm sorry, I know I'm not naming everyone, and if I've left you out, I'm sorry, but look at who's in the Unrestrict Minnesota Coalition. That's a great place to start. If you're saying like, I've donated or I've been donating or I don't have money to donate, what can I do? One thing I want us to all to take away from this is like, the law is not going to save us. Courts are not going to save us, right? Like, and we can't do this work in a vacuum. Like, to the extent that we need to do the harm reduction work of litigation to get rid of abortion restrictions, we can't do that in a vacuum. Like, the judges, they read the news, they know what's going on, and they need to hear your voice, right? In the op-ed section, in the letters to the editor, you're at events talking about this, you're telling your family about, like, you're not resting to like someone new knows your position on this, whether that's your legislator or whoever. We need to make sure people are not afraid to say abortion, that they unequivocally support abortion, not to kind of, falling into traps, right? Like, the third trimester abortion, that's where I draw the line. Like, if you support abortion care, you support abortion care, and people can make these decisions, right? I'm not, you may not, whatever you feel, right? Is it the number one priority to talk about, like, where your personal limitation is if you personally were going to have an abortion? Probably not, right? People want to hear just your position on what other people in your community can and should be allowed to do, right? So things like that. Also, we see it a lot of marches, the old like wire hanger imagery. I think it's important for people to know that you can safely self-manage your abortion with medication. And so, when people have access to that, if think of it as harm reduction, right? If people are going to self-manage their abortion, they can safely do so with medication abortion. Ideally, they would have a provider who's not subject to criminal penalties for helping them if they have questions or if something comes up, or to like talk them through it or whatever it may be, right? But there are safe ways to self-manage abortion. So kind of moving away from the dated imagery. So just kind of getting up to date on, and if you haven't advocated for abortion in a long time, but you feel strongly about it and you want to get back in it, just do some, look around the Unrestrict Minnesota website. You can get kind of updated information. Because, as we're litigating, and like I said, litigation's harm reduction, right? We're not looking to the courts to save us. We're just trying to get rid of some of these barriers. We have to do that in an environment where people are proudly saying, I support abortion. My state of Minnesota supports abortion. I want my courts to support abortion. I want my constitution to support abortion. Like that's the environment we want to be litigating in. So, keep it up, keep agitating, show up to marches, Erin.
Yeah, I was going to say, why did I have you talk about the calls to action as the legal director and I'm the advocacy director? But we are having a march for abortion justice on July 17th. I would sign up for the Unrestricted Minnesota email list so that you can get updates about that on time, location, and all that as we cement it in. But I really want to hammer home the reason why we march, the reason why we rally is that it actually matters to have numbers, to make demonstrative notice, right, that this many people are that upset. I remember after the 2016 election during the Women's March, I mean, do you remember people were so surprised? There was like 4 people in a little town in Antarctica and they all came out and they had their little signs. That stuff matters because it shows the 74% of Minnesotans who agree people should be able to make decisions about abortion care without the government interfering, right? And that's the kind of numbers we're talking about. So I expect to see 74% of Minnesotans turn out on July 17th for this rally and this march because it is that important. And then, Terry, do you want to talk about the last one? Because it's on the shirt.
Yeah, definitely. Again, vote. Voting is absolutely critical. Learn about your candidates. Learn about where they stand on the issues. And Erin, you had a really great statement. Turn your ballot over. Vote for Soil and Water District. Vote for everything. Vote in every election. That includes primaries. And so get out there and vote.
And I'll say this, you can register to vote at mnvotes.org. You can also request an absentee ballot so that it will come to your home so you don't have to try to remember when is election day. They'll mail you your ballot and they'll alert you when election day is. And you can do that every time there's an election. So you don't even have to remember it. The Secretary of State will remember it for you. So mnvotes.org. If you have moved, please re-register to vote. If you changed your name, please re-register to vote. Even if you live in an apartment building and you just moved across the hall and you have a new apartment building or a new apartment number, you still got to re-register to vote. There was a question that says, does Gender Justice endorse voters or have a voter guide? We do not. But I encourage you to reach out to people who are on your ballot and ask them their stance about abortion, about reproductive rights, health, and justice. And you can always look at their endorsing organizations because there are groups that endorse that'll tell you kind of where they're at. And then sometimes some of the groups have, questionnaires that are available online or what have you. So that's places that you can look, but Gender Justice does not do that. So that was a good question. So I want us to I'm gonna take us out. I thank everyone for joining tonight. I think we had, 100 people here or something like that. And so there's a lot to digest, but there's a lot to do going forward. What I don't want people to do is despair. This is not the end. This is not unsolvable. This is not a problem that we can't fix. However, it will take time. It will take our sustained engagement. And so what I want folks to do is really buckle down and get prepared for doing this for a while, right? It took the anti-abortion activists 50 years to overturn Roe v. Wade. I don't think it's going to take us 50 years to undo the damage, but I don't think it's going to happen next week. And so what we have to do is care for ourselves, care for community, and make sure that we're still coming together to make the changes that make this a better state and a better country to live in, a place that's safe for pregnant people, a place that's safe to access healthcare. So thank you so much for joining us. Terry or Jess, do you have anything you want to say as I close this out?
No, just don't get tired of pushing for this stuff is really important. I don't even want to read the news at this point to see all of the terrible effects of the court's ruling, but just knowing there are people out there who are doing this important work every day and have been since before this ruling and will continue to do so after is really heartening. So every time you kind of, like Erin was saying, when you feel that despair, turn to, you can turn off the Twitter, you can turn off Twitter, you can stop looking at the news, and you can instead go find resources and groups who've been doing this work and support them, plug in, figure out ways to get involved. And you when you're doing something, you'll see that there's a lot that can be done. You just close Twitter is my advice to myself.
Many small things equals a big thing. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a good night, and we'll see you here again soon for another SCOTUS chat to talk about what this court is up to. Have a good night.